Okay, everybody, welcome back to California History. As usual, I'll say my stuff about how you are. I hope you're safe. I do mean that. We should really get to the important question right off the top, though. Do you think my wife should shave my head? I don't know, need a haircut. Hair does not look good long, especially as it's starting to thin up here. I don't know. I wanted her to cut it, but she doesn't think she has the ability, so she wants to just shave it. I don't know. What do you guys think? Um, you probably all, I don't know, would rather it happen is because it'd be something weird. Weirder. I know a lot of people are doing it right now because we can't get haircuts. Anyway, today's video, I'm actually going to try and, this is the first time I'm going to try and use for both of my California history classes, my at Santa Rosa Junior College, History 22, at Cal State East Bay. This is my History 382. You guys are at the same place right now, so there's no reason for me to have to record two lectures, I don't think. So when possible, I'm going to just use one for the both of you guys and try and just be general. So if I'm referring to something in Hayward and Santa Rosa, you're like, why is he doing that? Well, that's why. I don't think there's anything else to say. We're going to do some Zoom meetings coming up. I'll post on your respective pages. We're going to do that to talk about the respective books that you guys are both reading different books. We're going to plan those next week, and I'll post that up soon if I haven't already. I don't think there's much else to do. Today's a relatively short video. I realized since we did away with your the group projects that was supposed to be done for both classes, actually have I think I'm a little short on lectures now because I had planned for this other thing. So I might just use some days to kind of do short lectures where I might have kind of doubled up on things. I'm just not going to really, I don't think you guys will mind if you're, some days are a little bit shorter and, there's a few hours of class time that you're not going to get. I'm not overly concerned with that type of stuff right now. But anyhow, so today will probably be, I think, a short day. Where's my share screen? Okay. Today, we are mainly staying in Los Angeles. You all should have watched the videos that I posted. And this is sort of, some of this stuff is going to cover kind of the same ground about how Los Angeles grew out. I'm just going to kind of flush out some other stuff in the early 1900s about how California was, or how Los Angeles was growing up. And a lot of that has to do with water. But we also, with water being an issue, San Francisco is definitely in the same boat. So we're going to start in LA and move up to water issues up in San Francisco. I hope you're all keeping up with your daily learning goals. Those are still your best way to study for potential quizzes, which are also coming up next week. I think for History 22 is 382. I think you guys might have another week after that. One thing, this is something that should have been in the last lecture, but I just kind of forgot to have it in there. Some people have asked me about the state capitals, or about the state different capitals in California, and how that works. And it's a weird, complicated story. I have a list here of of the different state capitals we had, and it's really just a mess. We've talked about, Monterey was the Spanish and the Mexican capital. And in 1849, when they hashed out the new California Constitution, they decided that the new state capital is going to be in San Jose. It was in San Jose for a couple of years, and then it really moves around a whole bunch over the next 4 years. I don't have good reasons why this is, good explanations. Some records have been destroyed. I think that's a thing. But I know all of these different cities were like vying for where the state capital should be, to gain some like power and prestige and things like that for having the capital there. This time being what it is, I assume vying for, that privilege meant slipping bribes to the California state legislators who were making the decisions. So I think there's a lot of money going around to, to keep moving around this capital. There's a lot of bribes paid. And that's why, sort of inexplicably, it goes all of a sudden from San Jose to Vallejo. I don't have good reasons on, again, why that would be. But once they get to Vallejo, they realize that the Capitol building wasn't actually built yet. Everybody had like moved up there, and the buildings weren't made. So, and the construction was too noisy. So it made it impossible to get any work done. So they decided, well, let's go up to Sacramento and be there for, until they finish construction of Vallejo. So most of the time when they were in Vallejo, they're actually in Sacramento. And then as soon as they got back to Vallejo, only a few days later, by the end of 1852, they decide, no, we're going to move to Benicia instead, just a little bit east of Vallejo. So don't know why they just Vallejo like that. And you get to Benicia, they're only there for about a year before they decide, no, we're going to go back up to Sacramento and get there in 1854. There's a number of floods and fires, which kind of make no permanent building there. We've talked about all the problems that they had in Sacramento. So there's no permanent buildings there for a while. This became such a mess, the California Supreme Court decided, we're going to weigh in on this, and they ruled, no, the capital is actually still officially in San Jose. So they started moving half of the government from Sacramento down to San Jose, like building archives and court buildings and stuff like that. Only to have a year later, the California Supreme Court again ruled, no, the capital should be in Sacramento, which I guess those guys are probably being bribed too. So there's this weird sort of like half government in different cities for a while, but eventually they all get up to Sacramento. Of course, floods are still a huge issue. There's nothing's permanent there for a long time. There's a huge flood we talked about in the winter of 1861 and 62. So that floods the entire city. They can't get any work done. And they say, well, let's go down to San Francisco until the flood, waters reside and dries out and everything gets rebuilt, and everybody who died of malaria is going to die of malaria. And so they're in Sacramento or San Francisco for 1862. And San Francisco seems like the obvious choice in general, because that was the biggest city in California at the time. It was already really the economic capital of the city or of the state. But that's exactly why they didn't want it to stay there. There's so much sort of corruption and money flowing through San Francisco already. They didn't want that pernicious influence to be the seat of government. So once Sacramento had significantly rebuilt, they went back up to there, where it would permanently stay. They wouldn't actually finish any of the permanent government buildings until 1869. So that's it, moved in, and there's been movements around. Of course, it hasn't been in the same building that entire time, but that's what it's been ever since. So that's the long, kind of boring history and confusing history of that. I'm not going to ask you any of this later on. I'm just, for general curiosity. Some people had asked, and I promised that I was going to talk about it at some point. So there you go. But now let's get to the matter at hand. So in those videos, you saw, Los Angeles, growing up. In the first video is, this tiny little town in 1870. There's only 5,000 people living there. It's really just, kind of a village. And by 1900, that's going to be up to 100,000 people. So that's a huge growth. And the city planners, looked at San Francisco and, considered what had been done right in that city and its construction, what had been done wrong. And Los Angeles had this major advantage of having almost unlimited space. San Francisco's pushed onto this tiny peninsula and they got to work around the hills. Los Angeles, could stretch out forever over this giant, San Gabriel Valley. So, and they're going to take full advantage of that. You see in this video, like it's planned as being kind of all of these separate like, little communities. This is supposed to be the city of the future. It's going to be spread out. It's going to be more flat. They're trying to not just be different than San Francisco, but also New York and all of the big cities back east that were like people are crammed together and living on top of each other and kept going up. They said no, this is going to be a city that's going to grow outward and as it seemed to be sort of healthier living, happier living. I don't know, maybe there's some truth to that. The people in Southern California to this day still love, the wide open spaces and everything. It's one of the things I didn't like about there and wanted to move up here. But, my friends and family who all stayed down there, they think Southern California, Los Angeles and Orange County, San Diego, like, why would anybody live anywhere else? This is the most beautiful place in the world. And it's like, yeah, whatever. I disagree. I think we all live in the most beautiful place in the world. But anyhow, so they drew up, the best way to sort of lay out Los Angeles. It's very carefully planned. You saw in the video also, there's, it's all connected by railroads. That was, very, planned out as well. Also, an advantage having in Los Angeles is, this wide open port line, all this open coastline. When you look at, the Santa Monica Bay, it's, it's just one giant beach, practically, this big open beach, and it's a lot easier to coordinate traffic. That doesn't have to come into the San Francisco Bay. This kind of limited shoreline space where boats can fit. So there's going to be this. Here's the rail lines I was talking about. Connecting to all of these different communities around the larger Los Angeles area. Here's some visual representations of of the city growing up. 1869. It was just tiny dirt road, little towns, and how quickly that that rises up to becomes a real city. But by 1924, there this massive city, and of course downtown Los Angeles today can rival any big city in America. But the strength of Los Angeles still is today that it is so spread out. So like I said, the port also developed incredibly quickly in Los Angeles. To this day, that it's officially the San Pedro port, but the Port of Los Angeles is 20% of all goods coming in and out of the United States go through the Port of Los Angeles. It's the largest port in the world and the busiest port in the world. So, that open space was definitely made it possible. And that is going to bring more people there. All of these people just have been driven. You also see in those videos about people who just want to live in this type of city. They think this is a great place to live, but just commerce and shipping will be one of those industries that's going to, people are going to work in. That's going to draw people here. There's all kinds of stevedores and people who are going to work on the docks and things like that. And of course, at the same time, this is all developing up. Is the same time that the internal combustion engine becomes a new thing. The engine that is used in cars, over that next 50-year period, every family in America is going to have a car in their garage and they're going to need oil for it to run on. Los Angeles also has a huge advantage of having massive amounts of oil, crude oil under the ground. So that becomes a booming industry that's giving lots and lots of people. So you have all these sort of people wanted to live in this kind of city. A lot of those people are going to be sort of, very religious people we talked about coming from the Midwest that are trying to build, sort of their perfect cities and things like that. Coming here, the oil industry is going to bring a different type of person that's going to be coming here to make money. And people don't think of today as, about how much oil the United States produces. They think of the Middle East or Venezuela, places like that. But for a long time, the United States was the oil supplier of the world. They have massive oil reserves, and Los Angeles is right at the forefront of that. Both, shipping right or oil rigs, right along the coast, which you'll see today in Huntington Beach, Long Beach. There's still working oil rigs in those, or those big oil pumps in those cities. There's a lot of offshore drilling right off the coast of there. So it's still a relatively strong industry in those areas if it wasn't what it once was. And also, since the oil industry is so big here, and there's so many oil companies, they're going to have a large an outsized influence in how the city grows up. They're going to, have lobbyists and stuff on the different boards, the different city supervisors and things like that. And they're going to make sure that, this new city is a city for cars. It's a city where people use, have to use all of this oil. They're very proud of this sort of oil industry they have. So that's why there's practically no public transit system. That rail line is going to get old and fade away pretty quickly. That you saw Henry Huntington had built up, this original thing, and freeways and highways are going to quickly overtake that entire system. And of course, the other thing that's going to bring in here is, like I said, the climate and geography. It's people or talk about how Los Angeles is the Eden by the ocean kind of thing. With all that space, developers are able to build houses cheaply. They're able to sell them cheaply. And that pure construction becomes its own industry. As people move in and work in construction, they build houses for the next wave of people who are moving in. And that, so you have this sort of self-perpetuating real estate industry that's going to spread out super fast. And, tons of people are working in that construction industry, in this real estate industry. And it's how, hold on, I'm going to switch over to another video here. That is how this becomes all those little towns and cities that had made up the larger Los Angeles area all start to mold together. And this is like this sort of representation here of just of Los Angeles as it grows out, as just by population centers. If you take away the map and just look at like where people are living, this is how you can see like how it starts to grow out from this central area. And there's all of these other little communities on the outskirts, and it just starts to meld together. Even today, when you go to Los Angeles, it's hard to know when you're actually in Los Angeles. Are you in Hollywood? Are you in Santa Monica? North Hollywood, Sherman Oaks, like all this stuff. Where is that? And it's, it becomes this, let's play that again. This massive metropolis that, where people are, these starts as different cities, now really just it's all one block of city. It's the coastline and and going well inland to this day is from all the way from Ventura to the Tijuana border. It's practically one giant big city. The only spot along the coast that's not developed is on the Camp Pendleton Marine base between Orange County and San Diego County. You might have driven through if you've made that drive. It's the one spot that there's no houses or any sort of development. But and even when I was a kid growing up in that area, in the South Orange County, there was all of these sort of separate little cities. My town is a relatively small town on the coast, and Dana Point. I can remember where it would end, only about a mile and a half from the ocean when I was a little kid. And all of that stuff just eventually ends up completely connecting. There's no way to tell ever what city you're actually in, and it all basically looks the same, which is another thing that I really hated about Orange County. Like everything looks the same, and it's all boring. But that's important to the development of, that's how this whole thing grows up. That's how this entire area connects and unites. Oh, darn it. I'm gonna flip through this again. Okay. As I finished the last lecture talking about, most of these people were coming, or at least many of them were people from the Midwest, and very religious, and that's going to make them. And back then, we associate now progressivism being with more secular people, and people that like I said, it's not religious, and conservative people being more religious. But back then, the populist and progressive movement was being pushed by religious people. The people that were like their Christian values are what informed them to have we got to push for better city governance. We got to have stronger unions to protect workers. Like all the stuff that we think of now as being, we don't connect with Christian evangelicalism in this country. Back then, those were the people who were pushing for those values. Prohibition was one of those things that was progressive religious values that people pushed for at the time, the idea of outlawing alcohol. And eventually, of course, in 1920, they're going to get that nationwide. But Southern California becomes a sort of experiment in that first of having a society almost completely banning alcohol. The city of Long Beach, do I have any slides for this stuff? No, I should make a slide for this. The city of Long Beach was originally, you couldn't live there. You could, if you were caught drinking or selling alcohol in the city, you could lose your house, and that was written into the city charter. So they're trying to make this whole area up to outlawing drinking, gambling, prostitution. They want to be like the opposite of San Francisco in that sense. And all that's going to sort of come back to bite them in the ass in a particular way. I wish I had more time to talk about this. Maybe I will add this to a lecture later on if I have extra lectures to give. Prohibition is exactly, is going to bring crime to this area, and they're not going to know how to handle it in Southern California. They're going to sort of try to deny it's there, and it's going to make crime and gangsters have an even stronger foothold there because they were trying to believe they lived in this sort of religious utopia. So actually, I might add a lecture that talks about that, and actually they have these floating casinos off the coast of there. We'll see. We'll get to that later. Where am I at? Being this sort of, liberal, progressive haven, the very populist movement in San Francisco, all the unions had been like established, and it was sort of understood there was a bit of corruption to keep them running in San Francisco. But in Los Angeles, the unions are formed like apart from the railroad industry and the oil industry and all of that stuff. And the city fathers, the very conservative city fathers hated the unions. They felt, these unions are too strong and are always trying to bust them down. And this was such a big deal that when the Los Angeles Times was printing articles about, how horrible unions were, some terrorist activists bombed the Los Angeles Times building. As a sort of symbolic attack about, this is what happens when you attack unions. And this was huge. This was 21 people died, injuring 100 others. This is, do I have it in here exactly how big? Not the biggest, it might have been the biggest terrorist attack on US soil before 9/11. Trying to think, the Wall Street bombing in 1921 in New York might have been bigger. I think it was, but this was the second biggest one until 9/11. And this becomes such a huge issue that the city fathers were trying to outlaw free speech literally on the streets, and on city streets and private property. They basically had tried to say you can't speak publicly about supporting unions in this town. They weren't able to pull that off, but employers were using spies, private detectives, agents, strike breakers, all of these sort of like, brutal, and underhanded tactics to try and take down the strength of unions. So, and that, it's weird to think of now that being, a real battle where people are, taking other people's lives. But unions were a much bigger deal back then than they are today. So the other thing about Los Angeles growing up is there was always a limit on how big it could grow. A lot of people were watching this city grow up and thinking, there's no way we're ever going to have enough water for this. The whole reason Los Angeles was built where it was because it was along this river, this LA River. It's a very dry area, even though it was being advertised as semi-tropical. And a lot of people are like, ooh, I want to live in the semi-tropical California. It's really a semi-arid environment. It's near desert environment, not quite a desert, but it's near to it. So, the LA River is sort of this one source of water coming through the city. There's a little bit of water underground, this aquifer, but that has to, that refills from rainwater and snow from the mountains and stuff. It refills underground. It was never going to be enough to, for this growing city to be able to survive on. And the river used to be like an actual river. Now, in the lower right-hand corner, you're seeing like what the LA River looks like today, and that's what it looks like most of the time. That's actually kind of a flush day. I actually have seen that, in strong rain, they did build this huge concrete riverbed for a reason. It actually does fill up sometime. It's actually real smart because it doesn't flood. But now today it almost seems like a joke because it's always sort of empty. You've seen plenty of movies that have car chases through there and things like that. Grand Theft Auto 5, you've driven through there and everything. But it is a legitimate river, or at least, it used to be more, but it was never enough to quench the thirst of a city that's growing up by hundreds of thousands of people a year. Water being such a big issue, there were sort of like different water companies that did actually fight battles known as water wars, where before these were sort of municipal properties, there was different companies promising to bring water, but I'm not going to go into that kind of stuff. Well, I'm just going to play this video from by William Mulholland, the guy who eventually solves the water crisis. We're going to see he ends up creating some other problems. I might share here. Hold on. That's not the one. He is not without controversy the way he solves the Los Angeles water problem. This video is very low budget. It might even been like some sort of student movie. But the length of it is good. All the information is good. I really picked it because it gives the right amount of information in the right amount of time. Anything else that is detailed, ends up being like an hour long, and I don't want to spend an hour on this whole thing. I mean, 10-minute video is perfect. So, like I said, it's low budget, but I think I'll get you all the information you need.
His book, Cadillac Desert, author Mark Reisner described Los Angeles as a city with no reason to be where it was. It had no minerals, no metals, no forests, and most importantly, no water. But it was one determined individual's actions that brought this vital element to the city of Los Angeles: William Mulholland, the architect and the engineer of the Great Los Angeles Aqueduct. An Irish-born immigrant, William Mulholland began his career in Los Angeles as a ditch digger, or zanjero, for a Los Angeles water system that was no more than a series of wooden canals called zanjas. Throughout his tenure with the Los Angeles Water Company, he rose from the ranks of a humble ditch digger to a project foreman, and eventually to the superintendent of the Los Angeles water system. By 1903, Los Angeles had grown from a small pueblo to a town of 100,000 people. and was faced with a heavy drought. Its only source of water, the rainfall-dependent Los Angeles River, had nearly been sucked dry, forcing the city to begin looking elsewhere for water. Mulholland's good friend, Fred Eaton, the mayor of Los Angeles, informed him of a great valley over 200 miles northeast of Los Angeles. The Owens Valley and its local Owens River seemed to be the key to quenching Los Angeles's thirst and replenishing its depleted water supply. As Eaton began to buy up water rights along the Owens River, Mulholland led the Los Angeles Water Board in designing an aqueduct that would transport water across the treacherous Sierra Nevada mountain range, over the vast Mojave Desert, right into the city of Los Angeles. After the plans were completed, a citywide vote was held on whether to build the impossible project. The drought-stricken city expressed great enthusiasm for the project, with an average vote of 10-to-1 ratio and the city's highest voter turnout for the time. Everyone on his side, Mulholland set out to take action on the aqueduct. Despite having no formal engineering training and nothing more than a grammar school education, Mulholland was determined to make his vision a reality. Construction commenced in 1908 in the Owens Valley. A massive undertaking of men, livestock, and materials was underway, with a workforce of almost 4,000 at construction's peak. At a rate of only 8 feet per day, Mulholland pushed his crews through the seemingly impossible project, blasting a record 600 feet of tunnel in less than a month.
The tunneling methods that were used on the aqueduct were very efficient, and other places in the world copied the methods that they developed on building the aqueduct.
He used a technique called placer mining. Placer mining actually been used in the mining industries a long time, and so in digging out what he did for the aqueduct using this placer, they used it in the Panama Canal.
Years later, the 226-mile-long aqueduct was completed. Between 30,000 and 40,000 residents of Los Angeles attended the opening gates of the aqueduct. Many brought tin cups to drink the water fresh out of the cascades that came roaring down the concrete canal. It was here William Mulholland, a man of few words, said to a thirsty Los Angeles, "There it is, take it." William Mulholland, while almost forgotten today, is truly the father of Los Angeles. The city is his legacy. The aqueduct helped give birth to the modern metropolis of Los Angeles. The population soared from about 100,000 people prior to the aqueduct's opening in 1913 to 1 million in 1922. It continued to grow at a rate faster than any other major city in the world. The aqueduct also represented a great step in a geological sense as well. It was one of the first instances of a major American city changing the natural geographic patterns of a waterway to lead to a city elsewhere for use as a main water source, rather than to have the city built directly at the source.
In California, it's definitely a milestone. It's actually a pretty amazing piece of engineering. It flows entirely by gravity, no pumps. It would be one of the more important civil engineering projects in the country.
The aqueduct's influence is not just witnessed in LA, it is seen throughout the world. It was the predecessor to world-changing projects such as the Panama Canal.
The people building the canal at the same time came here to California to see how Mulholland was building these dams with hydraulic fill, and they copied his methods. So hydraulic fill dams were kind of invented in the building of the aqueduct.
But following the aqueduct's opening in 1913, the once thriving agriculture of the Owens Valley slowly began to shrivel up. Residents complained that they had sold their land and natural riparian water rights to Los Angeles without fully knowing what they were going to be used for.
None of it was necessarily done in contravention of California water rights.
Despite the legal legitimacy of the sales, the people of the Owens Valley began to fight back against the parasitic aqueduct, even to the point of dynamiting vital points of it. Whereas Mulholland was a saint to Los Angeles, he was no more than a scoundrel in the eyes of the people of the Owens Valley.
The acts of taking water from the Owens Valley for the city of Los Angeles, I don't think even though it happens, I don't think it's necessarily something that should be focused on one individual.
A fictional account of this alleged swindling was told in the 1974 film Chinatown.
Los Angeles, 1937.
Despite being set 2 decades later, the film's great success brought the scandal into the public conscious again, and has become yet another reason the scandal is just as much a part of Mulholland's legacy as the aqueduct.
They're paying for water that they're not going to get. Oh, that's all taken care of. See, Mr. Gitz, either you bring the water to L.A., or you bring L.A. to the water.
William Mulholland's legacy was further tarnished on the day of the Great St. Francis Dam disaster. The St. Francis Dam was a concrete dam built to provide a reservoir of surplus water in close proximity to Los Angeles. But upon its first complete filling on March 12, 1928, the dam catastrophically failed, sending a tidal wave of 12 billion gallons of water, a whole year's supply, to rage through the nearby San Francisco and Santa Clarita River valleys. The torrents leveled local farmlands and residential areas, killing approximately 450 people. It remains the greatest civil engineering disaster in United States history. If anyone's actions were to blame for the dam's tragic failure, they were William Mulholland's.
If there's one person who has the majority of the blame for it, it's William Mulholland. He picked the site. He decided what dam would build there. He decided whether or not to use outside experts. He decided to raise the dam twice during its construction, but not make it any wider. So you can't put the blame on anyone else really, except William Mulholland.
A 1992 study revealed that the break in the dam was actually caused by an ancient landslide along the San Francisco fault line, undetectable during the dam's construction in the 1920s. But despite this evidence, Mulholland's reputation has still been soiled. Mortified by the disaster, he resigned from his position as head of the Department of Water and Power a few months later in disgrace. Of the disaster, he said, "I envy the dead." In 1935, 7 years after his resignation, Mulholland died at the age of 80. But despite his death, William Mulholland's aqueduct continues to transport water. While only 35% of Los Angeles' water supply still comes from the Owens Valley, the city continues to evolve into one of the greatest economic and cultural centers of the world, an accomplishment that would have been impossible without Mulholland's foresight. The aqueduct's means of water transportation has influenced modern projects such as the establishment of the Metropolitan Water District, the main source of Southern California's water. The district is a multi-billion-dollar collaboration of over 30 Southern California cities and water districts, which supplies over 10 million people from LA to San Diego with water daily from faraway sources such as the Colorado River. So whether seen as the father of Los Angeles or as a crook who drained the Owens Valley dry and accounted for the loss of hundreds of lives, every time millions use garden hoses, showers, or faucets, they are witnessing William Mulholland's legacy in action.
So let's look at the questions that I have here. Why am I getting a notification for that? I'm gonna have to worry about that later. Really? I start at the beginning every time with this. So who was William Mulholland? He was the guy who, the civil engineer who, came up with this giant dam. Where did he get the water from? The Owens River Valley, as a quiz question later on, where he got the water. And the controversy, well, there's really two controversies here, but the main one, that most people remember, is the Owens River Valley was, they drained it of all the water. The people there had signed contracts giving up water rights, but apparently it was more that they were lost a lot more water than they had expected. And to this day, sort of the Owens River Valley is kind of been ruined because all of that water goes to Los Angeles, and there's other cities, Mono Lake, and the other cities that have other places that they drain water from for that. And there's a fair amount of controversy going behind that. Of course, and the other thing is that when the dam that he constructed broke, later on they found out it wasn't his fault. They didn't know that at the time. Caused this huge flood, killing hundreds of people. Okay. So, like I said, other cities, other places need water. San Francisco is one of those places. I've mentioned a number of times why San Francisco did not seem to be a desirable location, because there's no natural water there. There's almost no water underground for them to pull water out of, and certainly not to sustain tons and tons of people. So it was also a city that seemed to have some sort of limit of how much it could grow. And this became very obvious as a problem in the 1906 earthquake, as massive fires raged across the city. They didn't have the water to put them out. Firemen would go to fire hydrants, tap it, and literally no water to come out. Because other firemen had already drained out there, so there's just no water left, which is a huge reason so much of the city burned down. They couldn't put it out. So I said, well, we need somewhere to be able to get our water from, and look towards the mountains. Look towards the Sierra Nevadas. There's plenty of water up there, but there's no natural lake to necessarily drain that they could get. So they decided, we need to make a lake, and they dammed up the Hetch Hetchy River Valley, which is part of Yosemite, or it's very close to Yosemite. I'm not sure exactly how the boundaries on that work, but they dam up this entire valley. The river that's flowing through there runs up against the dam, and now they have this natural water to flow all the way down to San Francisco. I have a video on this as well. I don't think it's really worth playing for. Usually I skip past it in classes. I'm not going to make you guys sit through right now. You can click on this if you want to know more. It's a lot of stuff about the sort of civil engineering of it, which if you're interested in that kind of stuff, there you go. But I don't think it's necessarily important to California history to talk about it. But this also has quite a bit of controversy, because there's this sort of beautiful piece of Yosemite up there that it's completely ruined. All the wildlife, the flora and fauna, die, or animals have to go somewhere else. All the plants and there, are now completely underwater. You can see the pictures of it on the left-hand side here. So there's movements today, talking about, take down the dam and make San Francisco get their water from somewhere else. I should also say that San Francisco is the only city that gets this water. It's this very natural, very clean water. It's some of the cleanest water you're going to get in a city, in a big American city in the country. And, I live in Oakland, and I don't even get this water. It goes straight past us and goes only to San Francisco. So the tap water you get in San Francisco is actually mountain spring water. It is very fresh. I remember when I worked in a hotel in San Francisco, people would ask, is it safe to drink the water? I don't want to drink water in a city. And so those people from rural areas are really worried about that. I'm like, no, this is like the cleanest water you're going to get. It's better than the bottled water that you're buying. So yeah, San Francisco has full rights to getting that. One other area that I have to mention that since I've referenced it a couple times, the 1906 earthquake, it's one of the things we have to talk about, but it's being a natural disaster. There's not a lot to say. Nothing caused it except for the earth. But it does, of course, have some major repercussions and needs to be mentioned. So there were a number of earthquakes already. San Francisco had been devastated a number of times from earthquakes and fires. This was the biggest earthquake. It was before the Richter scale was invented, so we don't know exactly. I don't know, scientists have calculated it's somewhere between a 7.7 and an 8.3. I don't know how they get that figure, but that's a pretty big earthquake. That is a huge, huge earthquake. And you have, these, tears in the city. But part of the reason that this was so devastating is because there was a much bigger city on there than there ever had been before. A city of brick, and brick crumbles in earthquake. And what's that stuff? Yeah, the shaking was felt as far north as Oregon, as far south as Los Angeles, felt in central Nevada. They think the epicenter was just off the coast, somewhere just north of the Golden Gate. At the time, in the immediate aftermath, 375 deaths were reported, but that's just reported deaths. We think there's many, many more, especially in Chinatown. Hundreds of fatalities in Chinatown went pretty much ignored and unrecorded at the time. The total number of deaths is thought to be somewhere from 700 to 3,000, and of course that's including in other nearby cities that were obviously dramatically affected as well. This left somewhere in the ballpark of 250,000 to 300,000 people homeless as their cities were destroyed, and this is going to be the really when Oakland and Berkeley really start to blow up. I mean, blow is probably the wrong word to use in this, but it greatly expand. It's with all these refugees of San Francisco moving over to the East Bay, and a lot of them, of course, decide to stay when they're over there. And both Oakland and Berkeley were pretty small little towns. They really grew up after this, and I could say I've lived in 4 houses in Oakland. In the 20 years that I've been here, all of them but one was built in 1906 or 1907. So they're all old houses, and they're in different parts of the city. So that gives you an idea of how much construction was built at that time. Like I said, the fire ends up being more destructive than the actual earthquake. It burns for 4 days. The worst parts of the fire were in what's now downtown San Francisco. That's where most of the city was. So the area you're seeing in red here is almost completely flattened. Everything. There's nothing in the city now. In this red area, there's nothing in that area older than 1906. Everything had to be completely devastated, and that's why the oldest houses in the cities are just across, up in Pacific Heights, like where you're seeing the 4 along there, so going up and down Fillmore Street. Yeah, you have houses, these old Victorians that have been there since like the 1870s and 80s and things like that. There was actually a few buildings. There are a couple of buildings that did survive. I know of one of them. There's a bar called the Saloon in North Beach. It's the oldest bar in San Francisco. And the reason it survived is because all of the firemen, it was the local fireman bar, and they really liked that bar. So as fire is raging across and they have to decide what buildings they're going to save, they decide to save their favorite bar. And that bar is still there today at Grant and Columbus. It's on Grant Avenue. It's called the Saloon. They have live music there. It's an okay bar. And I know, since they had run out of water as fire raged across the city, they didn't want it to, they wanted to keep it from expanding. You don't have enough water to do it, so they need to make a fire break, make something make a big area where there's nothing that could be flammable, where the fire can't reach. So they just dynamited all of Van Ness Avenue. That's the reason it stops where it does, because they made this big pit, filled it up with dynamite, and blew it up. And that made this big open area that the fire couldn't. It would have been much more difficult for the fire to be able to leap across. So sparks and stuff they did get over, they were able to control it a lot more. So that's what the fire break was. What saved most of the city. Of course, with with this type of thing, there's massive looting, and across people that take opportunities to loot, steal, and whatnot. The mayor made a special police force. He basically deputized a whole bunch of regular people to try and restore law and order, and told them they had orders to shoot any looters. That was the best way to figure out how to get this back under control. You can kill anybody who you see robbing. Some soldiers and state militia were sent out to restore order, and some of those guys were even caught looting. There's what you're seeing a picture of in the lower right hand corner there. So these soldiers who are people are still people, and they're tempted to destroy what they can, or steal what they can. One of the areas I was definitely devastated was Santa Rosa. Sorry, East Bay people on this one, but we got this pictures here of Santa Rosa. Pretty far north, a good 60 miles north of San Francisco, being just totally devastated. And there's this huge render across the ground. This is also in Sonoma County. This big wreck here. I don't know a ton about the effects in Santa Rosa, but I know it was one of those cities that was more devastated than most. Okay, that is it for today. So, as always, post any questions that you might have. Both these classes are staying pretty quiet right now. Unless I say otherwise, due dates are still standing. I'm behind on grading on everything right now, but I'm finally starting to get a little bit caught up on it. I understand, it's difficult right now. I'm having, problems too. If you're, if you can't make due dates, I'm being pretty liberal about, accepting stuff. Even, my policy has been after the day that it's due, you lose 10%. I'm going to give you usually a few more days, before I actually take off that 10%. So, I don't know. Be your best out there. Stay safe. I will see you all next week.